Welcome to Change Cycle, the podcast exploring the shift to a circular economy. Join host Christine Yeager as she dives into sustainable business actions with leading experts and confronts the discomfort that comes with change. Discover how change is at the center of optimizing recycling and creating a regenerative future. Tune into Change Cycle and be part of the solution.
Hi, and welcome to the first episode of Change Cycle. In this podcast, we're hoping to confront the discomfort that comes with change and learn from it, all under the surface of driving a circular economy, a better environmental future, societal change, all of the above, really, in an ideal world. I wanted to start with a little bit about myself. Because in this podcast, I'm hoping to interview people in the service of understanding how they have confronted the discomfort that comes with change, what they've learned from it, and what we as an audience can learn from their stories. Also, I'm going to go deep into some vocabulary because if you've been in the sustainability space for a little while, you've realized that there's a lot of vocabulary. There's a lot of acronyms. There's a lot of things that maybe you've never heard before. And in this podcast, we're hoping to talk a lot about the circular economy, extended producer responsibility, and other recycling, regenerative practices, a bunch of different types of concepts tied to reuse, recycle, reduce, and then where possible, we might expand out beyond that to other topics, but all in the service, again, to influence change. So who am I? I'm Christine Yeager. I am super excited to begin this podcast journey. I'm a Texan, which if you've ever met a Texan, it's because they've already told you. Sorry, the joke is, how do you know you've met a Texan? It's because they've already told you. I'm a Leo, born in August, Leo the lion. I also born in the year of the ox, bullheaded and sometimes stubborn. And I'm sure there's other good traits too. And I'm an extrovert. If you can measure it, it's like in the 90% extroversion, if that's a real thing, which is debatable. Also, I've recently found out I have ADHD and attentive ADHD, more so than the hyperactive, which just means that I can get hyperfixated on things, but also I kind of can be a little, blah, or a little much. I also love flair. I think one of my favorite holidays is Halloween. Another one is Mardi Gras. I love to throw parties. So basically, as somebody recently said to me, so you're not a wallflower. No, I'm not a wallflower. I practice being quiet so that I can let others speak, but that's because it doesn't come naturally to me. So I am here talking about this topic because I have been in the consumer packaged goods industry for a long time. I started out studying basically commercial printing. The title of the degree was graphic communications, but basically commercial printing. I got out of college and got a job working for a company. You may or may not know this, but there's a lot of steps between creative and printing packaging. And that company did all of those steps. And I was acutely aware that I was making trash, so much so that I started a Twitter account, which didn't really go anywhere. But I just was sort of accepting, like, I'm making beautiful trash and it's exciting. And I feel a lot of pride when I see the work that I do show up on the shelf. But nonetheless, it's going to be thrown away. And so thus began my sort of being cognizant of the impact that the work I was doing had on the environment. Fast forward, the last 18 months or so, I've been an impact consultant working directly with Circular Action Alliance. Now, I will have another episode to go deep into this vocabulary word, but the vocabulary word is extended producer responsibility, or EPR. This is a legislation that is passed in California, Colorado, Oregon, Minnesota, Maine, and Oregon. And this legislation effectively shifts the funding mechanism of the end of life management of a product, in this case, paper and packaging, away from local governments and municipalities and onto the brands that make the package. So, example, Coca-Cola, which I use because I worked there for over 11 years. So, in that world and in that work, I've been focused on sort of trying to make sure that producers or those that are obligated under the legislation understand their obligations and ultimately comply. And through that, I've learned a ton about EPR, extended producer responsibility, the challenges that come with improving the recycling infrastructure, and just generally, once a bill becomes a law, how much left there is to decipher and determine and define. And so therefore, how much lack of clarity there can be for those that are trying to prepare for that legislation. So, as I mentioned before that, I worked for Coca-Cola for over a decade, and I held many various roles across the organization. Again, beginning with a supplier to Coke in the packaging space. Then I went into point of sale. I did 5 years in master data, if you know what that is. And then I ended as the Director of Sustainability Program Management Office, or PMO, where I was really focused on operationalizing sustainability. And I bring all of this up to say, I had an incredible experience at Coca-Cola. I learned a ton. And I want to talk through a little bit of the things that I learned and not so much the specifics about my experience. You can go check out my LinkedIn if you want to see really what roles I held and all that stuff. So, what did I learn at Coca-Cola? Well, I learned that Coke was filled with a lot of really resourceful and very intelligent employees. And I learned over and over again, basically, that if it were easy, somebody would have solved it by now. Somebody would have done something about it and fixed the problem. So if there were a silver bullet, somebody would have figured it out. And this is something that comes up a lot in the sustainability space. It comes up over and over and over again that people are always like, well, if we just did this, then we could solve this problem. And the reality is, probably somebody tried to do just that, and there were a lot of challenges to get that to become the silver bullet. Another thing that I learned is that there are a lot of people who are very resourceful, and they come up with really unique and resourceful solutions to their problems, which then can be hard when you are trying to do enterprise-wide solutions and process changes or some other type of change at an enterprise level. It can make those like one-off type of solutions to everybody's little problem really makes the scale much more challenging because you have a lot of things to maybe unwind or a lot of things to maybe integrate. Again, this is a learning that I think also applies to the sustainability space, because sustainability challenges and solutions can be very hyper-local, but yet you need the impact to be macro and scale. And so this like constant tension between being resourceful and solving your problem and then having something that can be a solution for the total problem or organization or country or nation or world makes it very difficult. Another thing that I kind of learned along the way, and I was influenced by books I read or just the culture different people were trying to set, is this idea of assume best intent. And by assuming best intent, you can potentially diffuse a lot of like frustration, like defensiveness very naturally. And because a lot of times people are not trying to be malicious. In fact, they might care too much. And that's why there's this disconnect between you and that person. It's also possible that they've tried a solution that you are in fact recommending and they failed. And so they're trying to kind of maybe not in a good way, but they're trying to kind of shield you from that type of disappointment or something. It's often that also maybe they're a little jaded because they've been recognizing or shouting from the rooftops this problem for decades or years or whatever the time frame is, and nobody was listening. So I find that if you assume best intent and you kind of come at it from this perspective that it's likely that this person is trying to do what they think is right, then you can kind of diffuse that tension and perhaps move forward together. Another thing that I learned at Coke through a couple of different ways is that you need to, in order to drive real change, you need to understand who holds the purse strings. And this can be true at the senior leader level. It can be, do you need to understand the concerns and incentives driving the decisions for the CFO of the organization? But it can also be true about who you're trying to sell to. It may be that you're trying to get teens. In many cases, Coke is trying to catch consumers at at the teen level so that they sort of keep them for life. But really the decision maker is often the parents. And so you have to market to the right audience who's going to bring that package home. And so it's all about who holds the purse strings. This is also true if you're trying to get a grant for something or you're trying to sell to a business. You've got to think about how the thing that you're offering drives value for the prioritization of how they're going to spend their money. Another lesson I learned is that publicly traded companies make decisions differently than private companies. And sometimes it can feel short-sighted at the public company level. And it feels like private companies can sometimes make longer-term decisions. And this is something that I personally ran into challenges with when it comes to my final role around director of sustainability, which was trying to operationalize sustainability is again, at the end of the day, they have fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders of the company. And while that is how our economy works, I have a lot of personal drive to kind of support B Corps where the fiduciary responsibility is beyond shareholders and includes the environment and society. And then one of the final things that I learned at Coca-Cola was to lift others while you climb. I have an incredible network from my time at Coke. I learned a ton from my time at Coke. And I saw that the people who lifted the teams around them, the people that really focused on supporting top talent, they were the most successful emotionally, financially, in their titles. So trying to bring people along on the journey and not trying to take everything and all the credit for themselves. And again, lifting while you climb is something that has really been a guiding light for me lately, especially in this space of independent consulting and thinking through, how do I pay it forward? How do I think about how I can support others in being successful in their journey and their goals, especially when it comes to sustainability? So one of the things I'm going to ask all my interviewees, and so therefore I feel as though I should answer, is how do you live with intention? And this is something that's been really important to me, especially in the recent years. So in March of 2023, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity. You might not think this is lucky, but it was lucky for me. I was able to opt in to a reorganization that Coke was having. And that came with a comfortable lump sum that I could use as a financial cushion to really think through, how do I want to live my life with intention? My husband and I thought through our core values. We thought through how we wanted to spend our time, and just what was important to us. And we decided to make a shift and move to Colorado, where we could have a view of mountains every day. And most mornings I get to see the sunrise because my kids get up early, but also it's right there over the mountains. We have access to green space right behind us where we can go hiking, or we can bike downtown. We have access to a smaller town community. We also have access to really good food in downtown Denver. We also already had a few people here that were part of our community, which was also important to us so that we weren't starting from scratch in a new place. And then this allowed me to also think about how do I want to spend my time professionally. And I got really hyper focused on the fact that I want to take action. I want to drive material action in the marketplace related to the circular economy or positive environmental impact. And through all of this, I became really sort of almost obsessed with this idea that change is constant. I think you get a lot of commentary from folks about don't have too much change in your life. It can cause you to maybe make decisions that are irrational or something like that. But the reality is a lot of change you can't really control. It just happens, and you need to be able to be resilient through it and make decisions that are tied to something to help you, or you get a bit frozen. And so here I am kind of forcing change upon myself, but also second guessing things and like, am I blowing up my life for no reason type of thing. But change is constant. It's always happening. And it's something to be learned from. And it's something that you can do with resilience and focus and prioritization and intention. So, how have I influenced change? I've been a part of many enterprise-wide initiatives at Coke. I mentioned the 5 years of master data. That included massive implementations of new technology, new processes, new capabilities. And so I was influencing people to change processes, to change tools, to change technology, to change their way of thinking. Because let me tell you, a lot of people have a lot of things to complain about master data and talk about something that everybody feels like they could have fixed or they tried to fix and they couldn't. And so through the years and through various roles, I've kind of narrowed it down to a couple of steps that I take when I approach professional and sometimes I use this for personal change as well. So step one, define the vision. And for personal, that can be the core values. For professional, it's usually tied to objectives. But really, it's like, what's the why behind the change? Like, why are we doing this? What's the value it's going to bring? What's the vision that we're trying to achieve? And really crystallizing that. And then I try to think about who are the stakeholders? Who's impacted by this change? And then map out to the change. What are the changes that are actually going to happen? What does it look like? What needs to change in order to make it successful? How do we make this more smooth? What is the path of least resistance to this change? And then articulate the change in the context of what matters to those various stakeholders. So what matters to those stakeholders that are impacted by the change? And how do I contextualize the why in a way that matters to them? Meaning, back to who holds the purse strings, I need to explain to them why this is going to bring value and why they should put their money here. But for somebody else who's having to maybe shift the amount of time that they're spending on something, I need to explain to them how this will potentially improve their skill sets and build their resume or whatever the sort of positive personal impact might be for that person, because maybe they don't care as much about the value it's bringing to the company. It's more about like, I have to shift how I'm doing this and I'm used to doing it. And if it wasn't broken, why fix it type of mentality, right? So you got to personalize the change to the stakeholders. And that also allows you to improve your plan to accommodate their potential concerns or criticisms, which just makes your solution stronger. And then most importantly, celebrate the outcome. Even if it's a bad one, celebrate the positive results, Celebrate the inches forward you made, even in the face of failure. And then adjust as necessary. Use the failures as a learning opportunity. And if you can do that together with all of the people that you're trying to kind of push this change on, or involve in this change, or are impacted by this change, then people start to feel this level of ownership of the progress that you're making together. So it starts with the vision. And for me, that started with core values. And again, professionally, that starts with core objectives. So what are you trying to achieve? What are the metrics you're trying to drive? What are the benefits that's going to happen to the overall business? If you were to map out perfect best case scenario, what does that look like? What is most important to that vision? In the case of Circular Action Alliance, early on, it was an organization set to revolutionize the recycling industry. Like, how exciting is it when you feel that vision? You're like, yes, I can jump on that change train because I believe in that vision of revolutionizing the recycling industry, which is hard to do and has a lot of challenges, but maybe I can sift through that muck because I believe in the vision. So it gives you something to anchor back against in the face of concern, right? Which I'll get to in a minute. So then second, I break down like, who will this affect and how? So I try to think through where they are on the spectrum of full support versus fully against. And where are they? And what would bring them closer to full support? What are the things that are holding them back from supporting the change? And I start to map this out. And I do a lot more documentation professionally than personally, of course. But I even did this with my children when we were moving here because it was a lot of unknown. My 4-year-old was only, I guess, not quite 3. And he was like really concerned that we were going to not bring any of his toys. He's like, every time we go on a vacation, you don't bring all my stuff. So why are you going to bring my stuff all the way to Colorado in our suitcase? So there was a lot of explaining and trying to break down how this change was kind of going to impact him to bring him along the journey. And like, a 2.5-year-old, not super rational. And then the reality is, even if you're in full support of this change, everyone feels discomfort that comes with change. I felt it. I was like gunning for this idea of moving to Colorado. And yet every barrier, I was like, oh my God, are we making a terrible decision? What am I thinking? And the same thing happens professionally. You hit a barrier and you start to question, is this worth the effort? Is this worth the effort? Are we pushing up too heavy of a boulder up a too steep hill? And so that's where this vision becomes so critical, because you can go back and say, yes, this is all in service of reaching something that I truly believe will be better than it is today. And I can see it, and it will be hard, but I can feel the trajectory, and I believe in the vision, or I believe in the core values that I've set for this. And I can use that to guide me and to squash the doubt. So then this takes us back to the third step, which is to consider the point of view and feedback and concern from the affected people. It's so critical to bring that into effect while you're squashing the doubt of yourself, because they're having that same doubt as well, and they're not as close to it as whoever is pushing for the change, right? So an example, I've done a lot of process change specifically. And I've learned that the easiest and most successful process change is something that fits neatly into existing process, neatly into an existing way of doing things. So something that the change itself isn't so dramatic that it's like, oh, I just need to add a step within this series of steps that I already do. So it's much easier to slot in than to get somebody to completely change direction or start something new. And this is also true for habit forming. If you've ever gone to physical therapy, or even my allergist was like, just do your inhaler, when you brush your teeth. Same thing. I need to stand on one leg for a minute. So now I do my inhaler and then I stand on one leg while I brush my teeth. And so it's like attached onto something I'm already going to do every day. And it makes it so much easier to sort of make that shift. And I start to see the benefits. And then finally, you've got to celebrate. Again, even if it's not a success. One of my favorite things to do, which is super nerdy, is to do a retrospective. And my favorite form of retrospective is liked, loved, longed for, and lacked. And so that way you can think through, what did I like about this process? Even if the thing was a failure, right? We didn't hit the mark. We didn't get the results we were looking for. But there's had to have been something that you liked. There's probably at least one thing that you loved about the experience. So this is reframing that point of view that, oh, it was a failure. And it's like, no, there were things that were a success. Inch by inch, it's a cinch. Yard by yard, it's really hard. So you got to focus on those inch by inch wins. And then there's likely something that you longed for, and it wasn't probably out of your control, something beyond, but something that you can kind of, it puts a new frame of mind onto like, oh yeah, like that would have made it really much easier. And so therefore, it's something you can learn from. And then there's things that might have been lacking. So overall, we don't need that, or this was missing, but it puts you in this frame of mind of recognizing the successes, identifying what you learned and what you can do differently next time, and then you can go and try again. And that approach can actually really diffuse a tough project. So if you're working on a project and everybody's kind of mad at each other at the end, and then you go in and you do a retrospective and you give everybody kind of an opportunity to share their experiences, positive and negative, in this sort of format, I firsthand have seen it really diffuse and rebuild a team mentality around the vision and the execution. So I've been applying these steps to my work in general, and then also at Circular Action Alliance. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about what Circular Action Alliance is, what extended producer responsibility is in other episodes. But at the end of the day, it requires that companies who are considered producers have to understand their obligations and then take actions to be compliant. And so we used this approach to kind of help ground and educate producers on what is their obligation? What are the steps that they're going to have to take? What does EPR mean for their business, or extended producer responsibility? And it's complicated. I mean, it's complicated and it's evolving. And so one of the other points I want to make is that if you get back to that idea of assuming best intent, we did a lot of conversations with producers where they were allowed to ask us questions, but we didn't have the answers because things were complicated and they were evolving. And so we had to do a lot of, hey, I hear you. I am taking note of your question. I will work to get you an answer, but nonetheless, I need you to do X, Y, and Z steps, because these are the steps I know you have to do. This is the information I know of right now. And we will have to stay focused on these steps and then move forward. And then we can talk about those other things. All in this spirit of like, I hear you, I understand you, I am listening to you. However, I can't do everything you're asking me to do. So it's a balance of like drawing boundaries on what you can and can't do, and showing that you're empathetic and listening to what their needs are. And we've been doing this and evolving it at Circular Action Alliance as we get more information and we're able to share more information. And I have seen it diffuse frustration in the middle of a meeting. We get these questions and they're like ping, 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 ping. And then we remind them, hey, we are sharing the information as confidently as we can, as early as we can. We appreciate your questions. We take them in to help us guide our guidance. And here's what we know today. And I have seen the comments diffuse. So showing that empathy, that listening, and being very transparent about it can be so effective in influencing change. So, why do I embrace change? Well, we mentioned I have ADHD, which apparently comes also with this desire to like not be bored. And so therefore, sometimes when things are too repetitive, I get a little bored. But beyond that, for those that aren't wired that way, I love change because it pushes me to think differently and gain a new perspective. The first time you do something, it's uncomfortable, and I can feel it in my belly. That's why I pointed here. But then you do it again and it's more comfortable. And then you do it again and it's more comfortable. And so then the uncomfortable becomes comfortable. And the same is true for anything that you need to change. I mentioned the routine thing. That is hard for me. It is hard for me because I'm so anti-routine. It's hard for me to change my routine to take an inhaler every day. And so by embracing change and the discomfort that comes with it, it feels easier and easier to me. And then I feel like I can push through to hopefully one day make a real impact, because then I'm no stranger to change. And so that's why I embrace change, is it helps me grow. And I like that. I like being able to feel like this constant cycle of change is making me better and helping me drive more meaningful impact on the environment and society. So that's a little about me. Next episode, I will go deeper into circular economy, and then we have a slew of interviews, and we'll cover similar type of questions. I will, of course, adjust based on the conversation flow, but the key things that I'm really trying to understand from folks is, how do you live with intention? How do you influence change? And what advice do you give to others who are trying to influence change? And then why do you embrace change? Why embrace the discomfort? So thank you. And I hope you enjoy and continue to listen, like, subscribe, all the things.
Thank you for listening to Change Cycle. We hope that today's conversation inspires you to embrace the change that comes with building a world where circularity and social equity power the economy. Visit csyimpact.com to learn more about how you can implement sustainable strategies in your business. That's csyimpact.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you join us next time on Change Cycle.